Hey guys, tonight we're setting aside the comfortable rhythm of modern life and stepping into a different kind of night, one lit not by street lamps, but by the pale shimmer of ice and firelight. Imagine yourself in a world wrapped in cold, where vast walls of frozen water stretch across the horizon, where mammoths sway in silence against the wind, and where small clusters of our ancestors huddle close to flames, their shadows trembling on the walls of bone and hide. This is not a single chapter in history, but an era that lasted for millions of years, shaping the earth we know today in ways we're still discovering. Before we start, take a moment to settle in. Maybe you're curled beneath a blanket, listening as the night hums softly around you. Maybe you're somewhere far from snow entirely, yet ready to drift into this frozen memory of the planet. If you're enjoying this journey, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from and what time of night it is for you. Because if the Ice Age has one lesson, it's that we all share the same story of cold and survival, no matter where we live now. Part 1. Into the Frozen World. The first thing to know is that the Ice Age wasn't a single unbroken winter. It wasn't as if one day the sun dimmed and the world froze forever. Instead, it was a cycle, an immense pendulum that swung back and forth between frigid glacial periods and warmer intervals known as interglacials. Each swing took tens of thousands of years too slow for any single generation to notice, but unstoppable in its march. Driven by tiny shifts in the Earth's orbit and tilt so subtle you would never feel them standing on the ground, these cycles changed the way sunlight fell on the northern continents. A summer, a little cooler here, a winter, a little harsher, there until slowly, almost imperceptibly, the snows failed to melt and ice began to spread. To the people who lived through it, of course, there was no Ice Age. There was just life. They didn't know that their world was temporary, that forests would one day reclaim these plains, or that glaciers would pull back into the mountains. For them, survival was immediate, a fire against the wind, a spear against the mammoth, a story whispered to a child so that knowledge could outlast memory. Yet for us, with the benefit of hindsight, the Ice Age is a paradox, both alien and familiar, terrifying and beautiful. Picture yourself standing where Northern Europe, Siberia, or North America will one day bloom with cities, forests, and farms. Instead of skylines or green hills, you see a wall of ice hundreds of meters high. Its face gleams with faint blue veins, fractured into crevasses deep enough to swallow armies. The air is sharp and dry, heavy with the metallic scent of snow. At first glance, it seems lifeless. But look again. Out on the plains below, shaggy mammoths march in lines that never seem to end their curved tusks, catching the pale light like ivory crescents. Giant ground sloths, lumbering and strange claw at frozen shrubs in the Americas. Saber-toothed cats crouch low, their fangs glinting like daggers in the twilight. And farther south, where the ice never reaches forests, still sway rivers still run, and humans pick their way along game trails, bundled in furs, watching the horizon for both prey and predator. What strikes you most is the contrast. We often imagine the Ice Age as a world locked entirely in frost pole to pole and endless frozen desert. But the truth is stranger and far more varied. While the northern continents were sealed under ice, the equator remained warm enough for jungles and deserts to thrive. Even in a colder world, life adapted. It shifted, it endured, and sometimes it flourished. The Earth of the Ice Age was not a uniform prison of cold, but a patchwork glaciers in the North savannas in the south, and endless steppe grasslands bridging the in-between. The story of this era begins long before humans entered the stage. For millions of years, Earth has cycled between warm and cold phases, each leaving fingerprints in rock and soil. Scientists today unlock those records from deep ice cores drilled in Antarctica and Greenland. Each layer of trapped snow holds tiny bubbles of ancient air-fragile capsules that reveal the chemistry of the sky hundreds of thousands of years ago. From these frozen libraries, we know that the ice did not descend all at once. It crept forward, glaciers inching outward like slow grinding tides, then retreating, then surging again, sculpting the planet with every movement. Mountains bowed to their weight, valleys widened into U-shapes, and massive boulders were plucked from their homes and carried for hundreds of kilometers before being dropped like forgotten luggage. Even today, if you hike through Canada, Scandinavia, or the northern United States, you're walking across scars left by those glaciers. Lakes gouged out by moving ice flat-bottomed valleys, and solitary boulders stranded far from any cliff, all whisper the same story: the ice was here. But it wasn't only the land that changed. Oceans themselves withdrew. With so much water locked in the ice, sea levels fell by more than 100 meters, exposing new continents. Asia and North America were linked by a land bridge we now call Beringia, a frozen highway of tundra stretching across what is now the Bering Strait. Imagine standing on that bridge, herds of caribou and mammoth pushing steadily forward, wolves padding behind, and small human bands trudging in furs, their breath curling into the endless air. Every step brought them into new lands, new stories, and eventually into history itself. What's remarkable is how interconnected it all was. When ice sheets grew, they trapped not only water, but life itself, forcing deserts to expand and forests to shrink. In their place rose the mammoth steppe, a vast windswept grassland that covered Europe, Asia, and North America. Harsh, yes, but bursting with life, immense herds, predators, and eventually, human hunters bold enough to follow. Yet the pendulum never stilled. Every few tens of thousands of years, the ice receded. The earth greened again, rivers swelled, and forests advanced. Then inevitably, the glaciers crept forward once more. It was during one of these warmer windows that humans began to flourish. They shaped stone into blades, painted their lives onto cave walls, and gradually walked out of the Ice Age into what we now call history. And yet even today, the fingerprints of that frozen era are everywhere. Our migrations, our myths, our very bodies carry echoes of that time. The way our ancestors spread across continents, the stories of floods and monsters whispered by firesides, the persistence of endurance in our species, all of it was forged in the long shadow of the glaciers. So tonight, as we begin this slow walk into the Ice Age, keep in mind that it wasn't only cold, it was transformation. The earth was wild, sharp, and full of contrasts. It sculpted the ground beneath us and shaped the beings who would one day stand here, telling stories into the quiet of another night. The horizon is white with snow, the wind is rising, and the ice is calling us forward. This is only the beginning. Part 2. Cycles of Ice and Sunlight. When we talk about the Ice Age, it's tempting to imagine a single block of frozen time, a world locked away beneath white for tens of thousands of years. But the truth is subtler and stranger. The Ice Age was not one long winter, but a pattern, a rhythm that pulsed across the ages. Cold glacial periods gave way to warmer intervals, interglacials, before the pendulum swung back again. The earth breathed in ice and out in green, and it did so on a timescale so vast that no human could have truly perceived the swing. The gears of this rhythm are hidden in the sky. Every planet wobbles, tilts, and drifts, and Earth is no exception. Our orbit around the sun isn't a neat, tidy circle. It stretches and relaxes like a slow heartbeat. Our planet tilts on its axis, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less, altering the intensity of the seasons. And Earth itself wobbles like a spinning top, slowly shifting the orientation of its axis. These three motions, orbit, shape, axial tilt, and wobble, are what scientists call the Milankovitch cycles, named after the Serbian mathematician who calculated their patterns a century ago. Each cycle plays out over tens of thousands of years. Alone, they are delicate shifts. Together, they are tectonic levers, redistributing sunlight and changing the balance of ice and warmth across entire continents. Imagine, for instance, that the Earth tilts less steeply on its axis. Suddenly, summers in the north are cooler. Snow that once melted every year now lingers into the next. A thin layer of white becomes thicker year by year until the ground beneath disappears under a permanent cap. Now picture the opposite, a sharper tilt. Summers blaze hotter, and even after harsh winters, the snowpack retreats. The glaciers, those immense rivers of frozen time, begin to falter and retreat. What makes this remarkable is how ordinary it feels in the moment. A hunter in the plains of Europe or Siberia would never look up at the sun and think the orbit has shifted. The ice will grow. To them, a summer might feel a little shorter, a winter a little harsher. Life would continue. And yet, over thousands of years, the invisible hand of these cycles reshaped everything. But Earth's climate is not a simple machine. One shift leads to another, and soon you find yourself caught in loops of cause and effect. When glaciers expand, they reflect more sunlight back into space, cooling the Earth even further, a feedback that accelerates the freeze. When oceans cool, they pull more carbon dioxide from the air, lowering greenhouse gases and amplifying the chill. The colder it gets, the drier the world becomes. Deserts creep outward, forests wither, grasslands expand, and suddenly the entire planet looks unfamiliar. And the pendulum swings the other way too. When glaciers melt, they reveal dark earth and open seas that absorb more sunlight, pulling warmth back into the system. As oceans warm, they exhale carbon dioxide back into the sky, thickening the greenhouse blanket, and the ice recedes. The system is elegant, but never steady. If you could stand at one point on the timeline and watch the world through fast forward, it would feel like breathing. Ice would surge outward, covering continents in white. Then just as slowly, the glaciers would withdraw, rivers swelling in their wake, forests creeping northward. Over tens of thousands of years, the cycle repeats: inhale, exhale, inhale, again. But the rhythm was not always smooth. Within those grand swings came sudden jolts. Volcanic eruptions could throw ash into the air, dimming the sun for years, even decades, and giving glaciers a temporary advantage. The oceans, too, shifted their currents. Imagine the conveyor belt of water that carries heat from the equator to the poles, suddenly faltering. The result could plunge an entire hemisphere into cold. These were not subtle nudges. They were abrupt shocks, harsh winters, or brief warmings that must have unsettled the creatures living through them. And perhaps the most dramatic jolts came from the glaciers themselves. Picture a vast ice sheet, its edge holding back a colossal lake of meltwater. For centuries, that wall of ice stands firm. Then one summer, it fractures. The dam bursts. A flood crashes across the continent, tearing away soil-carving canyons, rewriting coastlines in days. These floods could cool the climate again by dumping fresh water into the oceans and disrupting global currents. For humans or animals living nearby, it must have felt like the world itself had broken open. We know all this, not because anyone wrote it down, but because the Earth recorded it in silence. Deep ice cores hold the story of every snowfall, each layer a frozen page. Tiny bubbles of air inside capture the atmosphere levels of carbon dioxide traces of volcanic ash, hints of ancient winds. Scientists drilling into Greenland or Antarctica can read those cores, like diaries of the planet stretching back hundreds of thousands of years. What they find is a heartbeat up, down, cold, warm, cold again. To us, thousands of years feel like eternity. To the Earth, they are the flick of a wrist. A single glacier might take centuries to advance just a few miles, yet its movement carved mountains, shifted rivers, and shaped the very soils our crops grow in today. The irony is that the creatures living under those glaciers, mammoths, bison humans, lived their entire lives without ever seeing the ice truly move. They existed in the shadow of change without noticing the change itself. And here is where the story turns human. Because though we could not feel the cycles, we adapted to their consequences. When the ice advanced, we followed herds southward. When the ice withdrew, we moved north again into lands scraped raw and new. Our species became expert at flexibility, not by choice, but because the world demanded it. You can imagine a band of early humans huddled at the edge of a glacier, listening to the groan of ice and the rush of meltwater. To them, it must have felt like standing at the edge of eternity, the land itself alive, breathing sometimes, whispering, sometimes roaring. The cycles of ice and sunlight were not merely background forces. They were the engine of the Ice Age world, setting every event into motion. The steppe grasslands, the migrations of herds, the rise and fall of predators, the routes humans took across continents, all of it was dictated by the subtle lean of the earth, the faint wobble in the sky. To understand the Ice Age, then, is to understand patience. A patience so vast, it seems almost impossible to grasp. The glaciers did not sprint. They crept. The climate did not flip like a switch. It swayed. And yet in that slow dance of cold and warmth, entire worlds appeared and vanished. So as we stand in this frozen past, looking at glaciers that seemed immovable and skies that seemed eternal, remember nothing here was permanent. The Ice Age was not a prison. It was a cycle, a rhythm, a pendulum whose slow, relentless swing shaped not just landscapes, but the very creatures who learned to live within its breath. Part 3. Glaciers. Architects of continents' glaciers are often imagined as silent, motionless walls of ice standing eternal against the horizon. But in truth, they are rivers. Rivers made of frozen time, moving slowly, but with a force greater than any storm. They do not rush. They press. Inch by inch, foot by foot, century by century, they reshape the very bones of the planet. At their peak, these ice sheets were titans. In North America, the Laurentide ice sheet stretched down from the Arctic, blanketing nearly all of Canada and pushing deep into what is now the United States. Its thickness was staggering, in places more than 2 miles high, rising above mountains like an inverted ocean suspended in the sky. Across the Atlantic, the Fennoscandian ice sheet spread over Scandinavia, shoving its frozen weight south into northern Europe. Even the southern hemisphere bore icy crowns, glaciers draped across the highlands of South America, New Zealand, and Antarctica, reaching farther than they do today. To imagine their scale, picture an ordinary mountain range. Now imagine it swallowed whole, erased beneath a dome of ice so heavy that the very crust of the earth bent under the weight. Land literally sagged beneath these glaciers, pushed down into the mantle. When the ice eventually melted, the land began to rise again, slowly, millimeter by millimeter, a rebound that is still happening today in Canada and Scandinavia. In this sense, the Ice Age is not over. The Earth is still correcting itself from the burden of all that frozen mass. But the glaciers were not content to sit quietly. They moved, not fast enough for the human eye to notice, but fast enough for geology. As they advanced, they carved into bedrock, grinding stone, into dust with the patience of millennia. Mountains were sharpened into jagged peaks, valleys widened into U-shapes, and great boulders were plucked from cliffs and carried for hundreds of miles locked within the ice. When the glaciers melted, they dropped these wanderers like forgotten baggage. Today, those glacial erratics sit scattered across plains in places like New England and Central Europe, massive stones resting far from any source, silent proof that the land once traveled beneath rivers of ice. The evidence of their sculpting hand is everywhere. In the American Midwest, fertile soils were built from fine dust-ground rock, swept by the glaciers and redeposited by wind. In Scandinavia, deep fjords bear the unmistakable signature of ice cutting into rock, filling with seawater when the glaciers retreated. The Great Lakes themselves, vast inland seas that hold 1/5 of the world's fresh water, are nothing more than scars gouged by the Laurentide and filled with meltwater when the ice pulled back. Every ripple of their surface is a reflection of glacial patience. And then there are the valleys. Unlike rivers which carve winding channels, glaciers scour everything in their path, creating valleys with steep walls and flat bottoms. Stand in Yosemite or the Scottish Highlands, and you're standing in the signature of ice. You can trace its movements, not by watching it creep forward, because it moved too slowly to witness, but by seeing what it left behind. It is like following the path of an invisible sculptor, one who works so slowly, you only ever see the chisel marks after the masterpiece is done. Of course, glaciers were not gentle sculptors. Their power could be catastrophic. When meltwater pooled at their edges, lakes formed behind fragile walls of ice. And when those barriers failed, floods tore across continents, reshaping land in days that glaciers had spent millennia carving. The Columbia River Gorge, with its sheer cliffs and rolling hills, was partly carved by these sudden violent floods, torrents of meltwater bursting free from glacial dams. Imagine walls of water, taller than skyscrapers, rushing through valleys, carrying boulders the size of houses scouring the earth bare. For the animals or humans nearby, it would have been a cataclysm, the sound of the world tearing open. Yet for all their violence, glaciers also gave. As they retreated, they left behind raw, mineral-rich ground, stripped clean and ready for new life. Plants crept in, first mosses and lichens, taking hold on bare stone, followed by grasses and shrubs. In time, animals followed, and then humans tracking herds into these newborn landscapes. The very soils that later nourished farms in Europe, Asia, and North America were gifts of glaciers ground down from mountains and spread across the land like flour sifted from stone. It is strange to think that entire human histories, the planting of wheat in Mesopotamia, the vineyards of France, the cornfields of the Midwest, are possible because glaciers once scoured and pulverized rock, leaving behind fertile earth. The Ice Age sculpted not only the land we walk on, but the civilizations we would eventually build. To walk along the edge of one of those glaciers, had you lived then, would have been to feel both awe and unease. The air around them was colder, sharper, carrying a chill that cut deeper than distance alone could explain. Sometimes you could hear it, the groan of shifting ice, the sharp crack as a crevasse split open, the distant boom of a chunk breaking away and tumbling down. It was a living presence, vast, indifferent, and unstoppable. To an early human, the glacier must have seemed like the edge of the world. Beyond it was nothing but white silence and the slow grinding of eternity. And yet, there was opportunity in its shadow. The rivers carved by melting ice became highways for humans and animals alike. The valleys filled with meltwater turned into rich wetlands, teeming with fish and birds. Even the dust swept from barren plains became loess soils among the most fertile in the world, where agriculture would one day flourish. The glaciers were destroyers, but also providers, harsh architects who carved out the foundations of the modern Earth. Think of them less as frozen prisons and more as sculptors with long, patient hands. They chiseled mountains into peaks, gouged valleys, spread soil, and even dictated the future paths of rivers. Every contour of the northern continents, every fertile plain, every unexpected boulder sitting out of place is a reminder that once the land was alive, under ice. To us, they seem gone, but their presence lingers. Every smooth hill in northern Europe, every fjord in Scandinavia, every lake across Canada is their signature. Even now, some of the glaciers still grind forward in Greenland and Antarctica, whispering of that ancient power. And deep beneath our feet, the land continues to rise, rebounding slowly from the weight it once bore. The work of glaciers never really ended. It simply slowed, as if the sculptor finally set down the chisel and left us with the world we know. So when we walk through rolling farmland, when we stand at the edge of a lake or trace the line of a valley, we are seeing the fingerprints of ice. The Ice Age is not only buried in history, it is etched into the very ground we live on. And in those marks, we can read the story of frozen architects who without a word carved continents and set the stage for everything that followed. Part 4. Oceans with drawbridges rise. If the glaciers were the chisels carving the continents, then the oceans were the tides responding to their every move. During the height of the Ice Age, so much of the planet's water was locked up in ice sheets that the seas themselves shrank back. Coastlines stretched outward. Continental shelves, normally hidden beneath shallow seas, rose into the air, and the shape of the world redrew itself. Sea levels fell more than 100 meters a drop, so immense it is hard to picture. Imagine today's beaches, extended outward by miles familiar bays, turned into grassy valleys, islands suddenly stitched to the mainland. This was not a sudden transformation. No one woke to find the sea gone overnight. Instead, it was a slow retreat generation by generation. A child could grow up by the coast fish and tidal pools and believe the shore unchanging. Only centuries later would his descendants notice that the water had crept away, leaving behind meadows where waves once lapped. But while imperceptible to the eye in any one lifetime, this retreat reshaped history. The seas pulled back to reveal land bridges, not narrow strips, but vast plains hundreds of kilometers wide, carrying rivers, grasslands, and herds. These bridges connected continents that we now see as forever separate. For early humans and animals, they were not bridges at all, but new countries, new horizons to cross. The most famous of these was Beringia, the expanse of tundra that once stretched between Siberia and Alaska. Picture it not as a precarious causeway, but as a landscape in its own right, wind-swept plains, dotted with shrubs and crossed by rivers, herds of mammoths and bison trudging across, wolves shadowing them, and small human groups trailing behind their footprints, stretching into a new world. To those travelers, this wasn't a bridge between continents. It was home, a world as real and alive as any other. Yet by crossing it, they unknowingly carried their species into the Americas, setting in motion a story that would echo for millennia. Farther south, another landmass appeared, the Sunda Shelf. When sea levels dropped, the shallow waters of Southeast Asia drained away, merging the islands of Indonesia with the mainland. For thousands of years, Sumatra, Borneo, Java, and the Malay Peninsula formed a single vast extension of Asia. To the west, the Sahel Shelf joined Australia, New Guinea, and Tasmania into a single continent. Across Europe, the seabed of what is now the North Sea emerged into the open air, creating Doggerland, a broad plain where rivers twisted across grasslands, later to vanish beneath the waves. Each of these vanished worlds carries a strange melancholy. They were places where humans hunted and built shelters, where animals grazed, where rivers cut valleys that are now drowned beneath salt water. Today, Doggerland lies silent under the North Sea, but fishermen still dredge up the bones of mammoths and tools of ancient hunters, proof that it was once as real as any field in Britain or Germany. These bridges were not only highways for migration, but crossroads of destiny. Animals spread across them, mammoths wandering into new continents, horses crossing from North America into Asia, bison moving in the opposite direction. Humans followed. The spread of Homo sapiens across the planet was written in these exposed plains. The story of settlement, of language, of myth itself can be traced to these temporary doors the ocean once left open. But the seas gave, and the seas took back. As the glaciers eventually melted, waters returned, swallowing the plains once more. Beringia sank beneath the waves of the Bering Strait. Doggerland drowned beneath the North Sea. The Sunda Shelf disappeared under tropical waters, breaking Asia back into scattered islands. And yet for thousands of years, these lost lands shaped migrations, cultures, and survival strategies. In a sense, our species was trained by their existence, made restless, curious, and forever willing to follow a horizon no matter where it led. Think of the irony. The very ground we walk on today is only temporary. Coastlines are not fixed, but shifting edges of a restless ocean. What feels permanent? The English Channel, the Java Sea, the Bering Strait are just the latest arrangements in a story that has rewritten itself countless times. When we gaze out across the water and see the sea as a boundary, it is worth remembering that once not so long ago, those boundaries were meadows, forests, and hunting grounds. And beneath the romance of vanished lands lies the raw physics of climate. With sea levels so low, the world's oceans grew colder and saltier. Currents shifted, winds carried dust across the continents, and climates locked into their frozen patterns. Even coral reefs were stranded, left high and dry when the seas abandoned them. Coastal ecosystems collapsed, replaced by dusty plains that looked barren yet supported new kinds of life. For the people of that age, the transformation must have felt both subtle and vast. A hunter might notice a river stretching farther the sea, no longer reaching its old line of rocks. Generations later, his descendants might find new valleys where their ancestors once fished. These were not metaphors, they were realities of survival. New lands meant new hunting grounds, new predators, new chances to live or to die. And then, as the Ice Age waned, the pendulum swung back. The waters returned, swallowing homes and hunting grounds. Imagine standing on the edge of Doggerland, watching the ocean slowly, year by year, claim the land where your ancestors had walked. Fields where mammoths once grazed disappeared under waves. Valleys filled with salt water. Hills became islands. What had seemed eternal was lost. Even so, the legacy remained. Rising seas pushed humans inland, clustering them along rivers and fertile valleys left behind by glaciers. Those migrations would plant the seeds of future civilizations. The drowned plains became memory, perhaps even myth. Flood stories echo across human cultures, tales of rising waters of lands swallowed by the sea. Could they be distant memories of Doggerland, or Beringia told and retold until they became legend? Perhaps. The retreat of the oceans was not just a change in geography. It was the reshuffling of the stage on which human history would play out. And like the glaciers, it left its fingerprints everywhere. Fertile soils spread by winds over exposed shelves became the breadbaskets of future ages. Rivers carved new courses across what had once been seafloor. And in the drowned valleys, beneath today's oceans, lie the ruins of worlds forgotten, still whispering from the dark. So next time you look at a map, think of it not as fixed, but as a snapshot of a restless earth, During the Ice Age, the map was different. Continents stretched, wider oceans retreated, and humanity walked across bridges of grass and dust to places they had never seen. And though those bridges are gone, the journeys they allowed have never been undone. The world we know, its peoples, its languages, its stories, was carried on the backs of glaciers and across the plains of vanished seas. Part 5. Winds and Dust, a Restless Sky. The Ice Age wasn't only written in ice and water. Look up, and the sky itself carried its mark. We often imagine frozen air to be crisp and clear, sharp blue skies stretching endlessly above white plains. But the truth is stranger. The atmosphere of the Ice Age was restless, heavy with dust and shadow, sometimes carrying storms across continents. It was not silence, but a constant sighing breath of wind. Every glacier that scoured the land left behind plains of raw powdered stone. The grinding weight of ice turned mountains into flour-fine dust, and when the glaciers paused or retreated, that dust lay exposed to the wind. Nothing grew there, nothing held it down, and so the wind lifted it, grain by grain, storm by storm, and carried it for hundreds, even thousands of miles. This dust drifted across continents. In China, the loess deposits grew hundreds of feet, thick, vast blankets of pale soil stacked by Ice Age storms. In Europe and North America, the same layers lie buried beneath farmland. Even now, when a farmer tills the black earth of the Midwest, or a vineyard grows on the slopes of France, they are harvesting the dust of the Ice Age ancient sediments carried on the wind and dropped long before the first plow ever touched the soil. Imagine standing on one of those plains. The horizon is pale and flat, the air filled with a faint haze. The sun hangs low, filtered through the veil of particles. The light is soft or muted, but there is something unsettling in it, as if the world is never entirely clear. Your eyes sting, your throat feels dry. And yet life carries on mammoths, grazing on the tough grasses that thrive in these dust-fed soils, predators shadowing them, and humans searching for the best ground to camp on. The winds themselves were driven by the contrasts of the age. The frozen north and the warmer south pulled against each other, creating vast pressure systems. Cold air masses swept down, colliding with warmer air, and the result was turbulence on a scale hard to imagine. Storms could strip entire landscapes bare. Snow was not always gentle flakes, drifting to the ground. Sometimes it was driven sideways, frozen needles scouring skin and stone alike. Paradoxically, the very heart of the Ice Age was often a desert. The cold locked up so much water in glaciers that little was left to fall as snow. The great ice sheets weren't buried under endless blizzards, but scoured by dry winds. The snow that did fall was often swept away, compacted into hard, wind-blown crusts. To stand there was to feel both the emptiness of a desert and the bite of the cold, a strange marriage of extremes. Above volcanoes added their voice to the atmosphere. When they erupted, ash and sulfur drifted high into the stratosphere, dimming the sun and cooling the earth even further. In the ice cores of Greenland and Antarctica, scientists have found those fingerprints, thin bands of ash that mark moments when the sky grew darker, when summers failed, and when glaciers pressed forward just a little farther. Even the very breath of the planet was different. The air contained far less carbon dioxide than it does today, almost half as much. That thin greenhouse blanket meant the atmosphere was colder, drier, and harsher. Plants struggled, growing low and tough, their survival feeding the herds that fed everything else. For humans, breathing in that thin, dusty air must have felt raw, like living on the edge of suffocation and survival. And yet dust was not only a burden, it carried nutrients. The minerals in those fine grains fed the grasses of the mammoth steppe, turning barren plains into grazing grounds, capable of supporting millions of animals. The wind, destructive in its restlessness, was also a silent farmer, spreading fertility across the land. It is one of the quiet paradoxes of the Ice Age skies, filled with choking dust, and yet grasslands beneath them bursting with life. Picture it. You stand on the mammoth steppe, the horizon vast and unbroken. The wind never stops tugging at your furs, whispering in your ears. In the distance, the air shimmers with haze. It is not smoke, but dust lifted from far away, carried for days across the continent. Above it all, the sun glows weak and pale, never enough to chase away the bite of the air. Every living thing here, mammoth wolf human, moves in rhythm with this sky. They find patches where snow has been blown aside, revealing the grasses beneath. They read the clouds for signs of change, sensing when storms will sweep across the plains. Survival is not only a matter of earth and ice, but of wind. Birds learned these rhythms too. Some migrated south to escape the worst of the cold. Others, like snowy owls, remained thriving in the endless open spaces, their feathers thick and their eyes sharp. For them, the haze of dust and snow was not an obstacle, but a stage, a hunting ground, where they could dive on lemmings, scurrying just beneath the crust. Humans, fragile as we were compared to mammoths or cave lions, also learned to read the air. The direction of the wind could mean the difference between stalking prey successfully or alerting it too soon. Dust on the horizon might warn of an approaching storm. The Ice Age sky was both enemy and ally, and to live beneath it was to be constantly aware of its moods. Even today, the marks of that atmosphere remain. The lowest plains of China, the fertile soils of Europe and North America, all of them born from Ice Age winds. The fertility of those soils made possible some of the first agricultural revolutions. Crops took root in ground that had once been barren under ice, then scoured, then rebuilt grain by storms. Without those restless skies, the course of human history would have been very different. So, when you think of the Ice Age, don't picture only silence and stillness. Picture the air alive with motion, with dust swirling in endless cycles, with storms that swept across entire continents. Picture volcanoes staining the sky, the sun a muted disk behind ash. Picture a world where every breath carried the memory of glaciers grinding stone, and every horizon was softened by a veil of dust that never quite settled. The Ice Age was written in ice and carved in stone, yes. But it was also whispered in the winds, carried in grains of dust that settled into the soil beneath our feet. The atmosphere itself was a restless participant in this frozen world, shaping the land, feeding the grass, testing the resilience of every creature beneath it. And in that strange balance, harsh, dusty skies above fertile grasslands below lay the paradox of the Ice Age, a world of extremes that somehow gave life room to thrive. Part 6. The mammoth steppe heart of the Ice Age. Stretching from the Atlantic shores of Europe across Siberia and into Alaska and the Great Plains of North America lay one of the most astonishing landscapes the Earth has ever known. It was neither tundra nor forest, neither desert nor savanna, but something uniquely its own, the mammoth steppe. Vast, windswept, cold, and dry, this biome became the beating heart of the Ice Age, a grassland so expansive and productive that it sustained giants on a scale we can scarcely imagine today. Picture an ocean of grass rolling out in every direction, interrupted only by low shrubs and the occasional dwarf willow hugging the frozen ground. No towering forests blocked the horizon. No mountains rose nearby, only an endless openness beneath the pale sky. The wind never stopped here. It swept the plains, rattling dry stalks of grass, carrying dust, carrying scents. And in that openness, life thrived. The mammoth steppe was harsh, but paradoxically rich. Its short summers brought bursts of growth when tough, nutrient-rich grasses and herbs exploded out of the thawed soil, nourished by minerals ground fine by glaciers and scattered by the wind. These plants wasted nothing. Instead of straining upward like trees, they stayed low and resilient, clinging close to the earth where warmth and moisture lingered. Their abundance was the secret of the steppe's greatness. Grass, humble and unassuming, was the engine that powered one of the richest ecosystems in Earth's history, and on that engine rode the giants. Woolly mammoths roamed in herds that seemed endless, their shaggy coats rippling in the wind, their great curved tusks sweeping through snow to uncover the food beneath. Alongside them moved steppe bison, their massive shoulders and heavy fur giving them the strength to graze through bitter cold. Wild horses smaller and stockier than those we know today galloped in tight bands across the plains, hooves striking frozen ground in a rhythm as old as the steppe itself. And then there were the woolly rhinoceroses, broad-shouldered and armed with horns like natural spears, pushing through drifts or squaring off against predators bold enough to challenge them. It is hard to comprehend the density of life here. Imagine cresting a ridge and seeing not emptiness, but motion everywhere. Herds of bison kicking up clouds of frost. Mammoths trudging in long lines, their breath rising in mist. Horses stamping and snorting as they huddle against the wind. Ravens circling overhead, waiting for the inevitable kill that would come when predator met prey. To stand in the mammoth steppe was to feel small, surrounded by the raw abundance of a world built on grass and ice. Predators, too, carved out their place. Packs of dire wolves prowled the edges of herds larger and more powerful than their modern descendants, their jaws built for bone crushing. Saber-toothed cats crouched in the sparse shrubs, their elongated fangs gleaming ivory in the pale light. Cave lions, leaner, heavier, and nearly twice the size of modern lions hunted in groups across the open plains. These predators were not mere scavengers of the giants. They challenged them, tested them, and sometimes brought them down in dramatic violent encounters that left the snow stained red. Yet for all the ferocity, there was balance. The predators never outstripped their prey, and the prey never stripped the land bare. The rhythm of life here was harsh, but sustainable, a cycle of endurance where every species knew its role. Mammoths kept shrubs and trees from encroaching, preserving the openness of the plains. Predators thinned the weak and sick, strengthening herds over time. The grasses, tough and resilient, rebounded each summer to feed it all again. It was a web as elegant as it was brutal. And in time, humans entered this stage. Compared to mammoths and dire wolves, they were fragile, hairless creatures with stone and bone in their hands. Yet they were adaptable. They followed the herds, reading their migrations, learning their habits. They built shelters from mammoth bones and covered them with hides, low huts that resisted the wind. They stitched furs into layered garments and lined boots with grass for insulation. In this land of giants, humans were not dominant. They were students' apprentices, learning how to survive by watching and mimicking the creatures around them. Evidence of their presence survives in haunting detail. Caves in Europe and Siberia bear paintings of bison, mammoths, and horses, their outlines traced in ochre and charcoal. These were not idle decorations. They were lessons, memories, or prayers, capturing the movement of the very animals their lives depended on. In the permafrost of Siberia, frozen mammoths still lie preserved, their fur intact, their stomachs filled with grasses they had eaten in their final hours. They are time capsules of the mammoth steppe, reminders that this world was not mythical, but real, that giants walked here and left their bones in the snow. The mammoth steppe was more than a place. It was a crucible. Its scale forced adaptation. Its openness demanded cooperation, Its harshness sharpened every species that endured it. For tens of thousands of years, this biome supported more biomass than perhaps any ecosystem since. And yet, like all things in the Ice Age, it was fragile. Its existence depended on cold, dry climates. When the glaciers retreated, forests crept north, and the grasses began to vanish. Shrubs and trees spread, breaking up the open plains. The great herds dwindled, the predators followed them into decline, and the mammoth steppe shrank into memory. Even so, its legacy endures. The reindeer of today, still migrating across Arctic tundras, carry echoes of the herds that once crossed Eurasia. The musk ox, shaggy and immovable, is a living fragment of that frozen grassland. In Siberia, foxes still change their coats from brown to white, vanishing into the snow as they once did when mammoths thundered past. And within us too, the legacy lingers. Our species learned patience, endurance, and adaptation here. Around fires built in the shadow of mammoth bones, we told stories that carried knowledge forward. In the mammoth steppe, humanity was tested and shaped into something that could survive not just the cold, but the future beyond it. Imagine standing there, the horizon unbroken, the sky vast and pale. The wind presses against you, pulling at your clothes, tugging your breath away. In the distance, a herd of mammoths moves like slow ships across the grass, their silhouettes stark against the snow. You hear the low rumble of bison, the sharp cry of ravens, the distant howl of wolves. It is a world of giants, of predators, of survival, measured in endurance and adaptation. The mammoth steppe was the heart of the Ice Age, beating steady beneath the restless winds and the endless sky. Part 7. Age of Giants. The Ice Age was not only an age of cold, it was an age of scale of creatures so large and strange that they would seem mythical if we did not have their bones, their frozen bodies, their cave paintings to prove they were real. To walk the earth, then, was to live in a world where size itself was a survival strategy. Bigger meant more insulation against the cold, more stamina to endure long migrations, more strength to fend off predators. The result was an earth that felt wilder, heavier, and more immense than the one we know. Start with the mammoths. Not solitary wanderers, but herds by the dozens, sometimes hundreds, stretching from one horizon to the other. Each woolly mammoth stood taller than a man, cloaked in layers of coarse hair and dense underwool that trapped heat close to the skin. Their great tusks curved outward and upward, tools as much as weapons, capable of sweeping away snow-stripping bark from trees or fending off a predator bold enough to strike. To see them moving in long lines across the steppe must have been like watching ships on a frozen sea, their shadows rippling across the snow as they pushed steadily forward. Beside them marched their stockier cousins, the mastodons. While mammoths grazed the open grasslands, mastodons favored the forest edges, tearing bark and branches with trunks shorter, but no less powerful. They moved in smaller groups, but with steady determination, reshaping the very woods they wandered through. The sound of their passing, the crack of branches, the groan of trees would have echoed like a storm rolling through the forest. Then there were the woolly rhinoceroses. Picture a massive beast cloaked in shaggy hair, its shoulders sloping into a powerful frame, and two horns jutting from its face like spears of keratin. The front horn could grow longer than a grown man was tall, sweeping low as the animal cleared snow to uncover the grasses beneath. Broad, thick-skinned, and nearly unassailable, the woolly rhino was a fortress on four legs, an herbivore so formidable that even saber-toothed cats approached with caution. Farther south and west, across the Americas, lumbered creatures almost too strange to believe. Ground sloths, some as large as small cars, hauled themselves across the plains. They tore up roots with claws longer than knives, pulled down branches with their immense weight, and stood upright to feed from the tops of trees. To encounter one would have been to meet a moving wall of muscle and fur, slow but unstoppable. And near them stalked one of the most fearsome predators of the age, the short-faced bear. Taller than any bear alive today, it could stand 12 feet high, its long legs carrying it at startling speeds across the plains. Unlike the lumbering giants, it shared the land with the short-faced bear, could outrun its prey, a nightmare of size combined with swiftness. Australia wrote its own chapter in this age of giants. Their marsupial lions, predators, with powerful jaws unlike anything else on Earth, hunted kangaroos that themselves grew taller and stronger than any alive today. Enormous flightless birds, heavier than ostriches, stalked the open country, while reptilian giants crocodiles with jaws unchanged since deep time waded in the rivers. Even in the seas, scale dominated. Along the coasts of the North Pacific grazed the Steller's sea cow, an immense marine mammal related to manatees growing over 9 meters long. Where kelp forests waved beneath the waves, these gentle giants drifted in slow herds, only to vanish completely after humans discovered and hunted them millennia later. The predators of this world matched its scale. Saber-toothed cats, with their legendary fangs, relied not on endurance, but on sudden violence. Their muscular shoulders and necks powered jaws designed to plunge those long teeth into flesh with terrifying precision. To see one crouched in the grass, eyes fixed, fangs gleaming, was to know a kind of danger no modern lion could match. Cave lions, nearly twice the weight of modern lions, hunted cooperatively across the plains, their golden coats blending with the pale light of the steppe. Dire wolves, broad-shouldered and bone-crushing, roamed in packs, their howls echoing over the open ground like rolling thunder. It was not only size that made this world extraordinary, it was density. The mammoth steppe and surrounding grasslands supported biomass on a scale rivaling Africa's savannas, but in colder, drier conditions. Imagine the Serengeti, but stretched across half the planet, its herds multiplied and magnified, its predators larger and deadlier. The air itself must have felt alive, filled with the sound of hooves, the crack of tusks, the calls of birds wheeling overhead, and humans lived among them. To hunt a mammoth was to risk everything, but the rewards were immense: meat for weeks, bones for shelters, hides for clothing. To challenge a bison or woolly rhino meant danger, but also survival. Humans observed these giants with a mixture of fear, reverence, and dependence. They carved them into ivory figurines, painted them on cave walls, and told stories about them around firelight. These animals were not abstract creatures of nature. They were neighbors, rivals, and sometimes gods. Think of the scale for a moment. A herd of mammoths moving across the horizon could take days to pass. A short-faced bear standing above you would blot out the sky. A saber-tooth crouching in the grass could pierce a bison's hide in seconds. To be human in that world was to feel fragile, and yet also to feel alive in a way we can scarcely imagine now. Every day was a negotiation with giants, every step taken with the knowledge that the land was ruled by creatures larger, stronger, and stranger than anything alive today. But this was balance, not chaos. Each giant had its place in the web. The mammoths cleared the shrubs and opened the grasslands. The bison grazed the plains. The predators kept herds strong. And humans, small but clever, learned to weave themselves into that balance, shaping tools and strategies that allowed them to stand among giants. If you could stand on a ridge in the Ice Age looking down on that frozen plain, you would see movement everywhere. Mammoths trudging steadily, bison clustering against the wind, rhinos pushing through snow, predators shadowing them, birds circling overhead. The land itself would feel alive, vibrating with the scale of life. And you would feel small, yes, but also part of something immense, a world where size was survival, and survival was beauty. The Age of Giants was brief in the span of Earth's history, but while it lasted, it created a planet that felt closer to myth than memory. Today we know it through fossils, frozen carcasses, and scattered paintings on cave walls. But once, not so long ago, it was real. And to those who lived within it, it was not legend, not prehistory. It was simply life. Part 8. Predators of the Permafrost. The Ice Age was not only a world of herds and giants, it was also a world stalked by shadows. To live on the mammoth steppe was to feel watched by eyes low in the grass, by forms pacing the horizon, by hunters built not just to survive the cold, but to exploit it. Predators of the permafrost were among the most fearsome creatures Earth has ever produced. Their silhouettes became symbols of danger, their cries reminders that survival here was never guaranteed. Start with the saber-toothed cats. Their long, curved fangs, each one longer than a man's hand, have become icons of the Ice Age. These were not creatures built for marathon chases. Their bodies were stocky shoulders, bulging with muscle necks thick with power. They were ambush specialists. Imagine one crouched low behind scrub, its golden eyes fixed on a young mammoth or bison muscles trembling with anticipation. When it struck, it was sudden, brutal, and final. Those dagger-like teeth pierced deep into vulnerable flesh before the prey could even run. To stumble across a saber tooth in the wild would have been to face a weapon of nature sharpened by millennia. But the saber tooth was not alone. Cave lions roamed the open plains nearly twice the weight of modern lions. Unlike the solitary strike of a saber tooth, these cats likely hunted in groups. Picture a pack of them fanning out across the snow, their golden coats blending with pale light, silent and disciplined. Few animals, even mammoths, could withstand a coordinated attack by predators of such size. In the caves of Europe, humans painted their forms on stone walls, capturing not only admiration, but fear. These lions were not just beasts. They were presences so powerful, they demanded to be remembered. Then, there were the dire wolves, heavier, larger, and more powerful than the wolves we know today. They roamed in packs that followed the herds for miles. Their teeth were built for crushing bone, their jaws locking onto prey with relentless force. To hear their howls roll across the mammoth steppe must have been to feel the sound in your bones. For humans, they were rivals as much as threats. Hunters stalking bison might find dire wolves already shadowing the herd, forcing them into dangerous decisions to challenge the pack to wait or to starve. Not all predators were giants, but even the smaller ones had their own fierce roles. Wolverines, compact and relentless, could drive scavengers away many times their size. Arctic foxes darted along the edges of hunts, stealing scraps and burying them beneath the snow. Raptors wheeled above their sharp eyes, scanning the plains for the moment when blood stained the snow. Each of them was a reminder that on the mammoth steppe, nothing went to waste. For humans, these predators were more than passing dangers. They shaped behavior. To travel alone was unthinkable. To let the fire burn low at night was to invite shadows into the camp. The glow of a campfire wasn't just warmth. It was a fragile circle of safety, a barrier against the permafrost hunters. One step beyond its light, and you entered their domain. Imagine lying awake in a shelter of bone and hide the wind, howling only to hear a low rumble outside the growl of a cave lion, the crack of twigs beneath a wolf's paw. Fear was constant, and vigilance was survival. Yet the relationship wasn't only fear. It was competition, and at times, uneasy coexistence. Humans and dire wolves often trailed the same herds. Both learned the rhythms of bison and mammoths. Both scavenged what the other left behind. A group of hunters might come across a mammoth carcass already claimed by saber-tooths, and the decision had to be made risk a confrontation, or retreat into hunger. Sometimes patience was the only weapon waiting for predators to finish before stepping forward to take what scraps remained. Still, humans adapted. Spears gave them reach. Fire gave them a weapon even predators hesitated to challenge. In time, hunters became more than prey that fought back. They became rivals small but dangerous, capable of fending off wolves or forcing lions from a kill. The balance shifted not to human dominance, but to a fragile truce. Predators still ruled the steppe, but humans had found a way to claim their own place within its hierarchy. And in that crucible, humans learned something essential: the value of cooperation. Alone, a person was vulnerable. Together, around a fire, armed with spears, watching each other's backs, they had a chance. Predators sharpened human instincts, taught us to be wary, to move in groups, to read the land for signs of danger. In the quiet pressure of survival, the great hunters of the Ice Age helped shape the very social bonds that still define us today. The presence of these predators made the Ice Age world feel alive in ways hard to imagine now. Every step outside the shelter carried risk. Every hunt was a negotiation, not just with the herds, but with the wolves, cats and lions who watched the same prey. To be human then was to live constantly in relation to these shadowed figures, both feared and respected, both enemy and teacher. Picture the scene: a herd of mammoths trudging across the horizon, their forms blurred by blowing snow. At the edge, dire wolves, paced tongues, lolling, waiting for weakness. In the grass, a saber-tooth crouches, muscles taut. Overhead, vultures circle in the pale sky. And beyond them all, a small group of humans watches, spears clutched tight, weighing their chance. It is a tableau of survival, a frozen stage where every player knows the stakes. The predators of the permafrost were not monsters, but parts of a system, reminders that life on the mammoth steppe was never one-sided. Strength was answered with strength, cunning with cunning. And for all the giants that grazed those endless plains, it was the hunters in the shadows who kept the balance, ensuring that the Ice Age was not simply a parade of herds, but a drama of tension, pursuit, and endurance. For us looking back, these predators live on in fossils, in cave paintings, in the DNA of the wolves that still roam the north. But once they were more than relics. They were eyes in the night, echoes on the wind, and the quiet pressure that pushed humanity to sharpen not only its spears, but its mind. The permafrost belonged to them as much as it did to mammoths or men, and their legacy is written in the very instincts that kept us alive. Part 9. Life Beneath the Snow. For all the spectacle of mammoths and saber-tooths, the Ice Age wasn't built only on giants. Its foundation lay in smaller worlds, tucked away beneath the snow, where few eyes ever looked. The steppe may have stretched vast and open, but just below its crust, life created a hidden network, tunnels, burrows, and shelters, where survival was measured not in tusks or claws, but in quickness, warmth, and cleverness. The snow itself was a paradox. To humans trudging across the steppe, it was bitter, relentless, a surface that numbed hands and froze lungs. But beneath its surface, it became a blanket. Layers of snow packed down into an insulating shell, holding in just enough heat to create a stable refuge. In the space between frozen ground and frozen sky, tiny mammals found sanctuary. Rodents carved out whole cities in miniature. Lemmings and voles dug networks of burrows, their small bodies shielded by the earth. They lived in the subnivean zone, that narrow layer beneath the snow, where the temperature stayed steady, where roots and seeds could be reached, where the worst of the wind could not intrude. In the dark of these passages, they scurried endlessly, gnawing on twigs, storing scraps of food, raising litters of pups in secret. It was in these hidden tunnels that the food chain began. The survival of giants rested on the persistence of creatures no bigger than your hand. predators knew this. Foxes pressed ears to the snow, listening for the faint scrabble of paws beneath. Owls swooped silently in the night, their talons striking through crust to pull up a lemming or vole that never saw the sky. Even wolves and lynxes would paw at drifts, digging after the movements they sensed below. The quiet hum of life in those tunnels fed the larger story of the Ice Age. And it wasn't only mammals. Insects, too, endured in astonishing ways. Some produced proteins that acted like natural antifreeze, preventing ice crystals from forming inside their cells. Others laid eggs built to survive entire winters, waiting for the brief blaze of summer sunlight to bring the next generation to life. Imagine a frozen grasshopper egg, lying dormant beneath layers of snow, biding its time for months, then suddenly hatching when the world thawed. In the balance between cold and growth, even the smallest organisms learned the art of patience. Birds adapted in different ways. Many species migrated south following warmth and food. But others, like the snowy owl, stayed year-round, their plumage dense enough to endure the freeze. To see one ghosting silently over the plains, eyes gleaming wings spread against the twilight sky, was to glimpse a predator perfectly tuned to this frozen ecosystem. They fed on the lemmings and voles beneath the snow, hunting the hidden world from above. The plants that sustained these hidden lives were no less remarkable. The grasses of the mammoth steppe clung stubbornly to life roots, stretching deep blades, lying dormant beneath snow until summer returned. Dwarf willows and birches grew low to the ground, hugging the soil to escape the wind. When warmth returned, even briefly, they burst into frantic growth, feeding rodents, insects, and eventually the herds of grazers that thundered across the plains. The balance was delicate. If the snow crusted too hard, rodents starved beneath it. If a thaw froze over again, plants suffocated under ice. And yet year after year, the system endured. Every adaptation, every vole burrow, every insect egg, every root that clung to dusty soil was a thread in the larger fabric of survival. For humans, this hidden world was not always visible, but its effects were felt. A hunter following reindeer could see where foxes dug, after rodents could watch snowy owls circling in the distance and know the land beneath his feet was alive even if he couldn't see it. The abundance of small prey supported larger predators, and those predators shaped the movements of the herds. It was all connected, a chain that stretched from the tiniest vole to the largest mammoth bound together under the snow. Even the snow itself carried lessons. To lie in a snow shelter, a hollow scraped into a drift, was to feel the same insulation rodents relied upon. Humans discovered that snow, for all its chill, could protect as much as it punished. Wrapped in furs inside a snow cave, you might feel the silence, the muffled world beneath, the way the wind above is cut off, replaced by stillness. It was a human echo of the hidden survival strategies that had been perfected by lemmings and voles for millennia. What makes this world beneath the snow so extraordinary is that it was invisible and yet indispensable. The mammoth steppe may dazzle us with its herds, but without the quiet foundation below, the giants would have starved. Grass drew strength from glacial dust. Rodents fed on grass. Owls fed on rodents. Predators fed on all of it. The giants were only the surface expression of a deeper resilience written into the soil. Even today, we can see fragments of this Ice Age world persisting. Arctic foxes still shift their coats from brown to white, with the seasons vanishing into snow, as they once did when mammoths roamed. Lemmings in the tundra still tunnel beneath drifts, unseen yet essential to the web of life. Snowy owls still hunt by sound striking prey, hidden beneath layers of white. These survivors are living fossils, echoes of a hidden world that once underpinned an entire age. If you could crouch now on the mammoth steppe and dig your hands into the snow, you would feel it warmth compared to the air above, a faint musty smell of roots and earth the scurry of something small, darting just out of sight. You might hear faintly the scratching of claws against frozen ground, a vole rushing through a tunnel, a life too small to notice and yet essential to everything around it. The Ice Age wasn't only built on glaciers and giants, it was built on quiet persistence. Beneath the snow lay an entire world, alive and busy, fragile, yet enduring. It was in those dark tunnels, in those insect eggs, in those tough grasses and shrubs that the resilience of the Ice Age truly lived. The giants drew our eyes, but the snow concealed the truth. Survival often belongs to the small, to the unseen, to the lives lived in silence. Part 10. Human arrival on the ice stage. For a long time, the Ice Age belonged to the giants. Mammoths, rhinos, lions, and wolves set the rhythm of the steppe, their migrations, and hunts the pulse of the frozen world. But then late in the story, another figure stepped into the scene, small, fragile, hairless, compared to the beasts around them, yet carrying something none of the others possessed. Ingenuity. Humans arrived on the ice stage, and though they were not the strongest or the fastest, they would prove to be the most adaptable. Imagine a band of these early people moving across the steppe. The horizon stretches endlessly, winds, whipping their furs. Each figure is wrapped in hides, sewn with bone needles, layered tight against the bitter cold. Their feet are bound in boots, stuffed with dry grass for insulation, each step crunching through snow. They carry bundles of spears, tipped with stone blades carefully napped from flint. Fire burns in small, carried embers, kept alive through wind and storm, because a flame meant more than warmth, it meant life. Their shelters were as ingenious as they were desperate. In the treeless expanses where wood was scarce, they turned to the bones of the giants around them. Ribs of mammoths became frames for huts covered in layers of hide to block the wind. Tusks arched above entrances like pale gates. Inside, the space was dim and cramped, lit by flickering firelight, but warm enough to keep death at bay. Smoke curled through openings in the hides, carrying with it the smell of burning fat fuel, carved from the very animals they hunted. Fire was their anchor. Around it, families gathered close hands, outstretched shadows dancing on the hide walls. Fire cooked meat, softened sinew for tools, and hardened the tips of spears. It was protection too, a circle of light predators hesitated to cross. In the long, unbroken nights of the Ice Age, winter fire became the fragile boundary between survival and oblivion. To lose it was to risk freezing within hours. To keep it alive was to hold a piece of the sun in the palm of your hand. But fire alone was not enough. These early humans needed food, and hunting in the Ice Age was no simple feat. The prey was enormous, often more dangerous than the predators. A single mammoth kill could feed an entire band for weeks, but bringing one down required cooperation on a scale no predator could match. Small groups worked together, driving animals toward concealed hunters, using spears hurled with precision, or perhaps ambushing in narrow valleys where escape was impossible. Failure meant hunger. Success meant survival tools, clothing, and shelter, all from the same kill. It wasn't only mammoths. Bison, reindeer, and wild horses all became targets. Bones cracked open for marrow hides, scraped and sewn into clothing, sinew twisted into thread. Nothing was wasted. Even the fat was rendered into fuel. Each hunt was not just a contest with the prey, but a negotiation with the cold itself, because without meat and fat, human bodies faltered in the relentless chill. Life was dangerous, but it was not without beauty. In caves scattered across Europe and Asia, humans left paintings that still whisper of their lives. Horses, bison, and mammoths gallop across walls in ochre and charcoal, drawn with such care that their muscles seem to ripple even now. Handprints pressed against stone remain as signatures across 30,000 years. These images may have been rituals for luck lessons for the young, or simply expressions of awe. Whatever their purpose, they show that even in a world where every day was a fight to survive, there was still room for imagination, for memory, for art. And humans were not alone. Other species of humans, Neanderthals in Europe and Western Asia, Denisovans farther east, shared the same frozen landscapes for a time. They too hunted, built shelters, and raised fires against the cold. Evidence suggests there were encounters, exchanges, perhaps even bonds between them and our own ancestors. In the DNA of people alive today, traces of those meetings remain, genetic echoes of partnerships forged in the Ice Age twilight. For thousands of years, multiple human species stood together on the same stage, facing the same predators, breathing the same frozen air. To walk as a human on that land was to exist at the edge of fragility. Frostbite waited at exposed fingers. Wolves circled in the dark. Storms could bury a camp in silence overnight. And yet these small bands endured because they adapted. They stitched tighter clothes, crafted sharper blades, mapped the land not with ink, but with memory. They watched the movements of herds, the patterns of rivers, the signs in the sky. They told stories around fires. Stories that carried knowledge as much as comfort. Stories of where to find prey, where danger lurked, where the world could be trusted, and where it could not. Think of a night in one of those bone and hide huts. Outside, the wind howls over the plains, rattling the walls. Inside, the fire crackles, low smoke drifting into the dark. A child curls against their mother beneath layers of fur. Hunters sit nearby, sharpening stone points, the scrape of flint against antler echoing in the silence. Someone speaks a story of a hunt of a lion in the grass, of the mammoths that moved like mountains across the snow. The child listens, eyes wide, the glow of firelight reflected in them. In that moment, knowledge is passed down, not through books or maps, but through voice and memory. And in that simple act, humanity takes another step toward becoming itself. The arrival of humans on the Ice Age stage did not erase the giants or the predators. It added a new thread to the tapestry, one that wove ingenuity into endurance. We were never the strongest or the fiercest, but we were the ones who could imagine tomorrow, who could plan a hunt before it began, who could take fire and tools and transform them into culture. The Ice Age shaped us, and in return, we began to shape it. It was a precarious balance. For now, humans were only one species among many, carving out a fragile existence in the shadow of glaciers. Yet within their bone huts and painted caves, something stirred that would outlast the mammoths, the lions, even the ice itself. A determination to endure, to adapt, to remember. Humanity had arrived, small, vulnerable, but unstoppable. Part 11. Tools, Fire, and First Art. The Ice Age tested every creature that lived within it, but for humans, the test was different. We were not built with thick coats of fur or tusks to dig through snow. We had no claws, no massive bulk to shield us from the cold. Our survival depended on something far more fragile, yet far more powerful: our ability to shape the world with our hands and minds. Tools, fire, and art became our adaptations, the weapons and wonders that allowed us not merely to endure the frozen plains, but to redefine what it meant to be human. Stone was our first and most faithful companion. On the riverbanks and cliffs of Europe, Africa, and Asia, people learned to strike flakes from cores of flint and chert, splitting the rock with deliberate blows. The earliest tools were simple scrapers, sharp-edged fragments that could cut meat or strip hides. but generation by generation, the craft grew finer. Hunters learned to make blades long and narrow, perfect for hafting onto wooden shafts to form spears. With these, a small group of humans could bring down an animal many times their size, something no lone predator could dream of. Bone and antler expanded this toolkit. Shaped into barbed points, they became fish hooks and spear tips. Antler tines were carved into pressure flakers' tools for shaping flint with precision. Even ivory scavenged from mammoth tusks was transformed into weapons ornaments and figurines. Nothing was wasted. Everything became part of survival. To hold one of those tools in your hand today is to feel the weight of ingenuity pressed into stone and bone tens of thousands of years ago. But technology was never just about efficiency. It was also about imagination. Deep inside caves, far from the reach of the sun, humans painted their world. With ochre, charcoal, and clay, they traced the shapes of mammoths, bison reindeer, and horses onto rock walls. Some are simple outlines. Others capture movement so vividly that muscles seem to ripple even now. In Chauvet Cave in France, lions prowl across stone panels, their forms layered as if moving in a hunt. In Lascaux, herds of horses surge across the walls, manes flying their bodies, filled with the energy of life. No one can say with certainty why these images were made. Perhaps they were part of rituals, attempts to summon luck for the hunt, or to honor the animals they relied upon. Perhaps they were lessons teaching the young to recognize the creatures of the plains. Or perhaps they were simply expressions of awe, proof that even in a harsh and unforgiving world, humans carried within them a need to create beauty. Whatever their purpose, the art endures as one of the earliest signs that survival alone was not enough. Even in the depths of the Ice Age, we sought meaning. Alongside the animals, there are handprints, red, black, or ochre silhouettes pressed against stone. Some are outlines sprayed around a hand held to the wall. Others are bold imprints dipped in pigment and slapped onto rock. They are signatures, across time reminders that real people stood there, reached out, and left a mark. To stand in those caves today, torchlight flickering, is to feel those hands almost pressing back from across 30,000 years. Sculpture too flourished. From ivory and stone, people carved figurines. Some were animals, mammoths, lions, birds, their forms captured in careful detail. Others were human, most famously the Venus figurines, stylized representations of the human form, often with exaggerated curves. Their meaning is debated: fertility symbols, charms, spiritual icons. Whatever they were, they speak of minds capable of abstraction, of seeing beyond immediate needs, to ideas and symbols that reach deeper. Even fire, that most practical of tools, became something more. At first, it was simply a lifeline warmth light, a way to cook food and scare predators. But soon, it was mastery. Humans learned not just to keep flames alive, but to spark them from flint and pyrite to coax embers into flame. Fire became portable, a weapon, a companion. Around its light, people gathered to share not just warmth, but stories. In that circle of flickering orange, imagination took root. The cave walls became canvases, the air filled with voices, and the Ice Age became more than survival. It became memory, culture, and meaning. Think of a night in one of those bone huts on the steppe. Outside, the wind scours the plains, the air so cold that exposed skin freezes in minutes. Inside, fire glows low. Children curl under hides, hunters sit sharpening blades, and someone begins to speak. A story unfolds of a lion in the grass, of a mammoth hunt of spirits that live in the ice. The firelight flickers against painted tusks and carved figurines, shadows dancing on hide walls. In that moment, knowledge is passed on, not through writing, but through memory, woven into story and symbol. This was how culture was born. Each tool, each flame, each painting and carving was more than survival. It was continuity. Tools turned necessity into possibility. Fire turned darkness into community. Art turned fleeting moments into permanence. And in those acts, humans became something new, not just survivors of the Ice Age, but shapers of it. Even today, their legacy lingers. The sharp edge of a stone tool echoes in the steel knives we carry. The flicker of fire in a hearth is the same comfort that guided our ancestors through endless winters. The art on cave walls, those silent whispers, still of our earliest attempts to make sense of the world. The giants of the Ice Age may be gone, but their shadows live in pigment and ivory, in stone and fire. And perhaps in those painted caves and carved figurines, we glimpse the first stirrings of what we now call humanity, the urge not only to endure, but to imagine. Part 12. Stories by the Fire. The Ice Age was harsh, but not silent. Beneath the endless winds and the groan of glaciers, another sound carried through the frozen nights human voices. Around flickering fires in bone huts, pressed against the cold, people told stories. Words became as vital as spears and furs because they carried knowledge forward, tied groups together, and gave meaning to lives lived in the shadow of ice. Picture it, a small circle of humans huddled in the glow of a fire. Outside, the night is black and merciless, the snow crusted hard by the wind. But inside, smoke curls upward through a gap in the hide roof. The fire crackles, sparks drifting into the gloom, throwing light across faces half hidden in furs. A child rests against their mother's side, eyes wide. A hunter sharpens a blade, listening. And an elder, with the slow rhythm of age, begins to speak. The stories could be practical, tales of how to track mammoths, how to follow rivers swollen with meltwater, how to find shelter in a storm. These were survival lessons wrapped in narrative. A child might not remember a list of rules, but they would remember a tale of the hunter who ignored the signs of wolves and never came back. A story turned knowledge into memory, and memory into survival. But the stories went further. They carried wonder, fear, and meaning. The predators of the permafrost, saber-toothed cats, cave lions, dire wolves must have loomed large in those tales. Perhaps they were not just beasts, but spirits, forces with names and personalities. The ice itself might have been alive in their stories, groaning and cracking as if it had a will of its own. Floods unleashed from melting glaciers could become remembered as the anger of water spirits. In the endless darkness of winter nights, such stories gave shape to the unknown. Some of the earliest myths humanity ever told may have been born here. The memory of floods, of rising seas that swallowed hunting grounds, echoes strangely in later legends of great deluges. The sight of constellations wheeling over the frozen steppe may have sparked tales of animals and hunters frozen in the sky. Even the predators feared and revered may live on in later traditions, great cats and wolves appearing in folklore across continents, their ancient shadows cast long. What made storytelling so powerful in the Ice Age was its intimacy. Firelight shrank the vast hostile world into a small circle of warmth. Within it, voices took on the weight of survival. Each tale carried information, whether about hunting techniques, the properties of plants, or the ways of the herds. But it also carried hope. To hear a story in the dark was to know you were not alone, that others had walked this land before and endured. Art and story worked hand in hand. The painted animals on cave walls may have been backdrops for tales told by torchlight. A hunter might point to a figure of a bison and tell how his grandfather brought one down in a snowstorm. A child might trace the outline of a mammoth and hear the story of its spirit, mighty and enduring. The flicker of firelight made the figures dance as if the walls themselves remembered. In this way, caves became theaters places where story art and survival braided together. And beyond survival, these stories gave identity. They tied small groups into something larger, a shared memory that reached across generations. A child who grew up hearing tales of ancestors who crossed great rivers or fought dire wolves was not only learning how to live, they were learning who they were. Even in the Ice Age, humans were shaping culture, the invisible fabric that binds us to one another and gives meaning to endurance. Think again of that circle by the fire. The wind outside claws at the walls, but inside the room is warm with bodies and voices. The elders' words carry across the group. A child stares into the flames, imagining lions in the grass. A hunter nods, remembering his own narrow escape from wolves. A mother hums softly to soothe her infant, weaving comfort into the story's rhythm. In that moment, the fire does more than keep away the cold. It creates a space for humanity to remember, to imagine, to connect. We cannot know the exact words spoken in those nights, but we can sense their themes. Endurance, danger, the mysteries of ice and sky, the animals that fed and threatened them, the bonds of family, the importance of cooperation. These were not cities or kingdoms, not yet. They were clusters of people holding on against the cold. But within their voices, within the hum of stories, lay the beginnings of everything that would follow. The Ice Age was a crucible not only for bodies, but for minds. In the constant presence of predators and the grinding patience of glaciers, humans learned to pass knowledge in ways no other species could. We learned to shape memory into narrative, to bind generations with invisible threads of voice. And in doing so, we carried more than survival across the frozen millennia. We carried culture, imagination, and meaning. If you stand outside on a winter's night, far from the noise of cities, you can still feel it, the quiet weight of dark, the bite of the air, the pull of firelight. In that stillness, you can almost hear them, voices carried by sparks into the dark, telling stories of beasts and rivers of ice and endurance. The Ice Age lives on, not only in stone tools and frozen bones, but in the stories we still tell, the myths that echo faintly of predators, floods, and stars. Around the fire, humanity learned to dream. Alai Maishi Part 13, Rhythms of Cold and Warmth. The Ice Age was never a single steady freeze. It was a rhythm, a heartbeat of the planet measured not in hours or days, but in tens of thousands of years. Cold deepened, then eased. Glaciers advanced, then retreated. Forests crept north, only to vanish again under the grinding weight of ice. To live in that time was to be caught in a cycle so slow that no single person could ever see its arc, and yet so vast that it shaped the destiny of continents. At the center of this rhythm were subtle movements of the Earth itself. Our planet does not orbit the sun in a perfect circle. It stretches and relaxes over spans of 100,000 years, shifting the amount of sunlight the poles receive. The tilt of Earth's axis leans more or less steeply every 41,000 years, sharpening or softening the seasons. And like a top losing speed, the Earth wobbles on its axis, slowly changing the orientation of the northern and southern hemispheres over 26,000 years. These are the Milankovitch cycles, and though imperceptible to the eye, their combined effect is profound. When summers in the north grow just a little cooler, snow lingers longer. Over centuries, that lingering snow hardens into ice, ice grows into glaciers, and glaciers creep into continents. But the planet is no simple machine. Once the ice gains momentum, it calls other forces to its side. White ice reflects sunlight back into space, cooling the Earth further in a feedback loop that accelerates the freeze. The oceans, chilled by falling temperatures, draw down more carbon dioxide, thinning the greenhouse blanket and plunging the world into even deeper cold. The reverse is also true. When warming begins, ice melts, exposing dark earth and water that absorb heat. The oceans release carbon dioxide, thickening the blanket of air, and the pendulum swings back toward warmth. If you could speed up time, you would see this great rhythm like a breath. The earth inhales cold glaciers, surge forward, swallowing valleys and hills. Then it exhales warmth. Ice pulls back rivers, swell forests return. Over and over for millions of years, this pattern has repeated, and each cycle has left its mark in the layers of stone, the bubbles of ancient air and ice cores, the scars carved into landscapes. Yet within the grand rhythm were sudden jolts, moments when the balance tipped sharply, unsettling everything alive. Volcanic eruptions could darken the sky for years, cooling the planet and giving glaciers a temporary advantage. Ocean currents shifting under the weight of fresh meltwater could falter, leaving one hemisphere to plunge into bitter cold while another warmed. At the edges of ice sheets, meltwater sometimes pooled into vast lakes, and when those fragile ice dams broke, floods tore across continents in days, reshaping land and jolting climate in ways that echoed for centuries. For the creatures living through it, these changes must have felt both invisible and overwhelming. Imagine a hunter on the mammoth steppe. In his lifetime, the seasons feel steady, the world unchanged. But generations later, his descendants would find the herds shifting south forests, creeping north rivers, carving new channels as the glaciers retreated. To them, the land itself seemed alive, shifting beneath their feet in ways they could not explain. The most famous of these jolts came near the end of the Ice Age in what we now call the Younger Dryas. Just as the world seemed to be warming for good, roughly 12,000 years ago, the cold returned with sudden force. Winter's sharpened glaciers steadied their advance, and the brief promise of a green world was snatched away. For over 1,000 years, humanity endured this last gasp of ice, waiting for spring to come, and never quite knowing when it would return. Then just as abruptly, the thaw resumed, and the Ice Age staggered toward its end. This back and forth left fingerprints, not just in landscapes, but in myths. Around the world, cultures carry stories of floods that swallowed valleys, of endless winters that tested survival, of skies darkened by ash or dust. Perhaps these are not coincidences, but memories carried across generations, echoes of real climatic shifts experienced in the twilight of the Ice Age. The flood myths of Mesopotamia, the tales of endless winters in Norse legend, even whispers of great beasts fading into silence, all may be shadows of the same rhythm that once held the earth in its grip. And yet, for all its scale, the rhythm of cold and warmth was not destruction alone. It was creation. Each surge of ice-carved valleys left behind fertile soils, reshaped rivers. Each retreat opened new lands, exposing fresh ground, rich with nutrients, ready to be colonized by plants, animals, and eventually humans. The cycle was harsh, but it was also a sculptor, remaking the earth again and again, ensuring that life was never static. For humans, the cycle forced adaptability. They learned to follow the herds as they shifted south during glacial peaks, then pushed northward when warmth returned. They tracked rivers swollen by meltwater, learned to fish new streams to find game in landscapes freshly revealed by ice. Each generation carried the memory of change encoded not in books, but in stories told by firelight. And in this way, humanity itself became a species tuned to transformation, shaped not by stability, but by the patience to endure a world that never stood still. Picture the land itself breathing. A glacier creeps forward mile by mile over thousands of years. The world grows pale. Winds sharpen deserts spread. Then as centuries pass, warmth returns. Rivers roar from beneath the ice, carving new paths. Valleys' green forests creep outward. Animals migrate. Humans follow, and the earth exhales. And then once more, the breath reverses, and cold claims the land again. This was the rhythm of the Ice Age relentless patient, a pendulum too vast to stop. It is tempting to think of the Ice Age as a prison of cold. But in truth, it was a cycle of change, brutal, yes, but fertile in its own way. It tested every species, reshaped continents, and forced humans to become storytellers, inventors, and wanderers. In those rhythms of cold. Part 14, Catastrophic Floods. The Ice Age was a world of slow rhythms, glaciers, creeping forests, advancing and retreating climates shifting over thousands of years. But sometimes patience gave way to violence. Beneath the vast sheets of ice meltwater gathered silent and unseen until the moment came when barriers failed. And when they did, the result was catastrophic floods so immense they reshaped continents in days, carving scars still visible on the land today. One of the greatest examples lay beneath the Laurentide ice sheet in North America. As the glaciers melted, a colossal body of water formed at their edge, glacial Lake Agassiz. Larger than all the Great Lakes combined, it stretched across what is now Canada and the northern United States. For centuries, its sat contained its waters dammed by walls of ice. Then suddenly, those walls weakened. The dam broke. Imagine the roar. Entire valleys drowned in hours as water burst free, surging across the land with unstoppable force. Boulders the size of houses were rolled like pebbles, soil was stripped away, and new channels were gouged into the bedrock. Rivers that had once meandered gently were transformed into raging torrents miles wide. This wasn't just a flood. It was a continent unmade and remade. The water surged toward the oceans, raising global sea levels, shifting climates, and sending shockwaves through ecosystems thousands of miles away. And this was not an isolated event. All across the edges of the glaciers, lakes formed behind fragile ice dams. In the Pacific Northwest, the Great Missoula floods tore repeatedly through the land. Each time a glacial lake the size of modern Lake Erie broke free, releasing walls of water that thundered across Washington and Oregon. The floods scoured the earth, bare carving the Columbia River Gorge, leaving behind vast ripple marks waveforms in the land itself, frozen reminders of torrents that dwarfed any modern river. Stand in those valleys today, and you can still see the marks cliffs, gouged raw boulders, stranded in places they never should be, entire scablands shaped not by centuries, but by days of watery violence. Siberia, too, bore its scars. Vast glacial lakes once spread across the steppe, trapped by frozen barriers. When those dams broke, plains were swept clean, rivers, rerouted, ecosystems erased in hours. Even Europe felt the force. As ice retreated, meltwater pooled in basins across the continent. From time to time, those waters surged free, flooding valleys, shifting coastlines, and forcing humans and animals alike to move, suddenly abandoning hunting grounds now buried beneath torrents. The violence of these floods cannot be overstated. Picture walls of water, hundreds of feet high, crashing across landscapes, tearing down forests, drowning herds of mammoths and bison in minutes. Imagine the thunder of stone grinding against stone, the roar of water carrying entire forests away. For the humans who lived through it, survival must have felt like standing against the anger of the earth itself. Camps along lake shores could vanish overnight. Valleys rich in game could be obliterated in hours. To witness such an event was to watch the land betray itself, reshaping into something unrecognizable. Yet these floods were more than destruction. They were also beginnings. When the torrents subsided, they left behind fertile plains layered with rich sediments. They carved new valleys, that became lifelines for future rivers. They filled basins that would become permanent lakes, some of the largest in the world today. The Great Lakes themselves, though not created in a single catastrophic burst, were born of the same processes. Their basins deepened and filled by the retreat of ice and meltwater. Even the climate shifted under the flood's force. When Lake Agassiz poured into the oceans, the sudden rush of fresh water disrupted global currents, weakening the conveyor belt of heat that moves between equator and poles. The result was the Younger Dryas, a 1,000-year return to near-glacial cold, just as the world seemed poised to warm for good. To live in that era was to feel the sting of betrayal from the climate itself, warmth promised then stolen away, all because of a flood unleashed from the heart of the ice. For humans, the floods must have become part of their stories. Perhaps they told of waters that swallowed valleys of spirits, angry with hunters of rivers that rose overnight and carried everything away. These tales may echo down to us in flood myths, told across cultures, stories of deluges of survival in boats, or on high ground, of worlds washed clean and begun anew. It is easy to see in the Missoula floods, or the draining of Lake Agassiz, the roots of such myths, memories of real cataclysms passed down through generations. And yet, even in the face of these floods, humanity endured. We adapted. Camps destroyed were rebuilt elsewhere. Hunting grounds lost to water were replaced with new ones carved by the torrents. Fertile soils left behind offered opportunity. Rivers, created by the floods, provided fish and transport. In every disaster, there was also renewal. The Ice Age demanded this lesson again and again. Nothing is permanent. Everything changes, and survival belongs to those who move with the land, not against it. Walk those flood-shaped landscapes today, and the echoes remain. In Washington, state enormous dry waterfalls, cataracts larger than Niagara, but without water, stand silent, carved by torrents that have long since ended. In Montana and Idaho, boulders the size of cottages lie scattered across plains rolled there by floodwaters. In Canada, the remnants of Lake Agassiz can be traced in the outlines of modern lakes and prairies. In Europe, ancient river valleys tell of sudden reroutings, as if the land itself had rewritten its script in haste. These are the scars of catastrophe, but also the signatures of creation. The Ice Age was not a gentle sculptor. Sometimes it carved with slow patience, but other times it struck with violence, reshaping the earth in moments. And in those moments, rivers, plains, and coastlines were set that would define the world long after the ice had gone. For the people who stood on those shores, who watched the waters rise and felt the ground tremble beneath them, it must have seemed like the end of everything. But from our vantage point, we see it differently. Those floods were not endings, but turning points. They cleared the stage for new ecosystems, new opportunities, new beginnings. The Ice Age, in its rhythm of patience and violence, wrote its story, both slowly and suddenly. And in the floods that tore through its frozen heart, it reminded every creature alive that the earth was never fixed, never safe, never still. Part 15. Retreat of the Ice. After millennia of dominance, the giants of ice began to falter. The glaciers that had once advanced like slow armies across continents, carving valleys and grinding mountains to dust, now faced their retreat. It did not happen in a single dramatic collapse, but in a long, uneven surrender. Ice thinned, fractured, and melted, leaving behind a world transformed, one that would never again look the same. Imagine standing at the edge of the Laurentide ice sheet in North America during its final days. For generations, the horizon had been nothing but a wall of blue-white, a frozen ocean frozen in place. But now, the ice groans and cracks meltwater streaming from its edge in foaming rivers. Great slabs calve from the front, tumbling with thunder into lakes newly born beneath the glacier's weight. Where once silence reigned, now there is noise, rushing water, crashing ice, the sound of a continent reshaping itself. The retreat began tentatively, as warming summers outpaced winters. Snow still fell, but it did not last. Sunlight reflected from dark earth, and water began to eat at the glaciers from below and at their edges. Rivers cut channels beneath the ice-carving tunnels, where torrents thundered unseen. Entire lakes pooled in secret caverns within the glaciers, only to burst free in catastrophic floods. Each step backward left behind new scars, but also new opportunities. As the ice pulled back, the land revealed was raw, scraped clean of forest and soil. At first, it looked barren, scarred with rock and gravel. But quickly, life moved in. Mosses and lichens crept across bare stone, their tiny filaments cracking rock into soil. Grasses followed hardy pioneers rooted in the fresh dust of glaciers. In time, shrubs spread, and then trees, birch, pine, and spruce at first hardy enough to endure cold. These forests marked the greening of the north, a slow reclamation of ground, held in ice for tens of thousands of years. In Europe, the retreat of the Fennoscandian ice sheet revealed valleys and fjords that would one day cradle cities and farms. In North America, the Great Lakes filled with meltwater, their basins gouged by ice and left as vast inland seas. Rivers swelled, carving new courses, some still followed today. Even the ground itself responded. Land once pressed down under the immense weight of glaciers began to rise slowly, inch by inch, rebounding upward, as if sighing in relief. In places like Scandinavia and Canada, that rise continues even now. The animals too felt the change. Herds of mammoths and bison, long accustomed to steppe grasslands, now faced landscapes shifting beneath their feet. Forests crept into old grazing grounds, breaking open plains with walls of trees. Where once they could see predators from miles away, now shadows hid among trunks. For the giants of the steppe, this was not an opportunity, but a slow narrowing of their world. Their herds thinned, their ranges shrank, and their time was running out. Predators followed the same path. Cave lions, saber-toothed cats, dire wolves, all had thrived on the open plains, where herds stretched as far as the eye could see. But as forests closed in and prey declined, so too did their strength. One by one, the great hunters vanished, leaving behind only bones and cave paintings to remember them. For humans, the retreat of the ice was both challenge and promise. On the one hand, old hunting grounds drowned beneath rising seas or disappeared beneath forests. On the other, new rivers offered fish, new valleys offered fertile soil, and new climates offered opportunities to settle in ways their ancestors never had. Where mammoth bone huts once stood, villages began to rise built near rivers or lakes rich with resources. Fishing, gathering, and eventually cultivating plants became part of survival, marking the first tentative steps toward agriculture. And there was something else, abundance. The floods and retreat left behind plains layered with glacial silt among the richest soils on Earth. These loess deposits would become the breadbaskets of future civilizations. The lands along the Yellow River in China, the Danube in Europe, the Mississippi in North America, all were gifts of the glaciers. Their fertility, a legacy of ice crushed into dust and spread by wind. Without those soils, the rise of agriculture and cities might have looked very different. The retreat of the ice also redrew coastlines. As the glaciers melted, the seas surged back, swallowing the land bridges that had once carried humans across continents. Beringia vanished beneath the Bering Strait doggerland, drowned under the North Sea, and the Sunda and Sahel shelves broke apart into the islands of Southeast Asia and Australia. What had once been highways for migration became seas and straits, isolating peoples and cultures that had once shared ground. To those who lived at the edges, the rising waters must have seemed both terrifying and inexorable, a slow but unstoppable swallowing of their world. And yet, even as glaciers surrendered, their presence lingered. In mountain ranges, from the Alps to the Rockies, ice clung to high peaks, carving cirques and valleys that still carry its marks. In Greenland and Antarctica, remnants of the great ice sheets endure vast enough to remind us that the Ice Age has not entirely ended. The Earth is still warming from that long freeze, still reshaping itself from its legacy. Imagine standing on the plains of Europe as the last glaciers recede, where once herds of mammoths trudged forests, rise in waves of green. Birds fill the air, with song rivers roar with meltwater, and the air smells of soil and pine rather than endless frost. For the first time in tens of thousands of years, the land is open to permanence. Humanity, once a wandering species, chasing herds across the ice, now has the chance to stay, to plant, to build. The retreat of the ice was not merely an ending. It was the beginning of the world, as we know it, a warmer, greener, more stable planet where civilizations could flourish. But its memory remains etched in stone and soil in the myths of floods and winters that linger across cultures. The Ice Age released its grip slowly, reluctantly, but in doing so, it shaped the ground upon which our history would unfold. Part 16. Extinction Winter. The retreat of the glaciers opened a greener world, but for the great beasts of the Ice Age, it marked the beginning of the end. This final chapter of their story is often called the Extinction Winter, a time not of snow and ice, but of absence. One by one, the giants that had defined the steppe began to vanish. The woolly mammoths, the saber-toothed cats, the giant sloths, the short-faced bear species that had endured for hundreds of thousands of years were gone in a geological blink. Their disappearance remains one of the great mysteries of prehistory, a puzzle that speaks not only to climate, but also to us. At first, the changes were subtle. As forests spread northward and grasslands shrank, the mammoth steppe, once the richest ecosystem on Earth, fragmented. Mammoths found less open grazing. Woolly rhinos lost their icy plains to trees. Bison, reindeer, and horses endured, but their ranges shifted, leaving the balance of the steppe broken. Predators suffered too. Cave lions, already specialized for the open plains, saw their prey diminish. Dire wolves found fewer herds to follow. Saber-toothed cats lost the advantage of ambush when forests swallowed the grasslands. Survival, once a balance, tipped inexorably toward collapse. But climate alone cannot explain the speed of the extinctions. The Ice Age had seen countless advances and retreats of glaciers, yet the megafauna had survived them all. Why then did so many vanish in this final warming? Increasingly, the answer seems to lie in the arrival of a new predator: humans. When our species spread into new continents, the timing of extinctions was uncanny. In Australia, giant kangaroos, marsupial lions, and towering flightless birds disappeared not long after humans arrived around 45,000 years ago. In North America, mammoths, mastodons, and giant sloths vanished within a few millennia of human settlement. Across Eurasia, the same story repeated, though more slowly, hunters and herds pressing against one another until the balance broke. The overkill hypothesis, proposed by scientists, suggests that even small groups of hunters could tip the scales. Large animals reproduce slowly. A mammoth might take 20 years to reach maturity, and females bore calves only every few years. If hunters killed even a few too many each generation, herds could not recover. Over centuries, a brief span in evolutionary time, extinction became inevitable. And yet, to picture humans as mindless destroyers oversimplifies the truth. The Ice Age world was not one of abundance without cost. Hunting a mammoth was a perilous act that demanded courage, cooperation, and ingenuity. Success could mean food, shelter, and tools for an entire band. Failure could mean death. To those hunters, the mammoths and bison were not mere prey, but the center of life itself. The cave paintings and carved figurines suggest reverence as much as predation, a recognition of kinship even as survival demanded blood. Still, the evidence is stark. Wherever humans spread, extinctions followed. Climate change weakened the giants. Humans finished the work. Together, they formed a 1-2 blow from which the megafauna could not recover. But not all was lost at once. Some species clung on in isolated refuges, ghosts of a vanished world. On Wrangel Island in the Arctic Ocean, a small population of mammoths survived until as recently as 4,000 years ago, the same time that humans in Egypt were building pyramids. Imagine that while pharaohs raised stone monuments under the desert sun, shaggy mammoths still trudged through Arctic snow relics of an ice age long ended elsewhere. On St. Paul Island in Alaska, mammoths lasted even longer, hidden away until rising seas finally cut off their grasslands. These lonely survivors remind us that extinction is rarely clean or absolute. It is drawn out, uneven, full of echoes. The absence of giants reshaped ecosystems. Without mammoths to trample shrubs and spread seeds, forests advance more quickly. Without vast herds of bison and horses, grasslands thinned. Without predators like saber-toothed cats and cave lions, new balances of power emerged. The web of the Ice Age, so intricate and elegant, unraveled strand by strand. What emerged was a quieter world, less dramatic, less populated by titans. For humans, this transition was bittersweet. On one hand, the loss of great prey forced new strategies. Hunters turned to smaller animals, to fishing, to gathering plants and roots. In time, these pressures encouraged the domestication of animals and the cultivation of crops. Agriculture was in a sense born in the absence of giants. On the other hand, something profound was lost. The stories told by firelight shifted. Where once children listened to tales of mammoths and lions, now those animals became memories, spirits, myths. The world felt emptier, though no less demanding. Even today, their absence haunts us. We dream of mammoths, of saber-tooths, of strange giants lumbering through snow. We imagine them in stories, in films, even in science, where some now whisper of resurrecting them through genetic engineering. Why, perhaps because we sense that their disappearance was not inevitable, that we were there at the end, and perhaps we played a role. Their ghosts linger not only in bones beneath permafrost, but in our collective imagination. Extinction Winter reminds us of the fragility of abundance. The giants of the Ice Age seemed eternal, as permanent as glaciers, as enduring as the cold. But nothing was permanent. Climate shifted, humans spread, and a web that had endured for ages unraveled in just a few millennia. Picture the silence that followed. A plain once filled with the trumpeting of mammoths and the thunder of bison hooves now lies still. The roar of lions is gone. The heavy tread of rhinos no longer shakes the ground. Only the wind remains whispering across grass that grows where giants once fed. To stand in that silence is to feel the weight of loss, but also to understand the truth of change. The Ice Age did not end with ice alone. It ended with the disappearance of the animals that defined it. And yet their legacy endures. In the soils they fertilized, in the forests they shaped, in the stories and art they inspired. In our very DNA traces of their presence linger adaptations forged in a world of giants. The Ice Age was their stage, but its lessons became ours. Extinction Winter was not only their end, it was the threshold of our beginning. Part 17. a greener Earth emerges. When the Ice Age finally loosened its grip, the change was profound. For tens of millennia, the world had been defined by its whiteness, glaciers, tundra, wind-swept plains, where grass was the thin green lifeline of millions. But as the great ice sheets retreated, the Earth took on a new palette. White yielded to green. Forests spread into valleys once gouged by glaciers, rivers swelled with meltwater, and landscapes barren for ages erupted in life. The first pioneers were modest mosses, lichens, grasses. They clung to raw stone freshly uncovered by ice, breaking it down grain by grain. In their wake came shrubs, then trees. Birch and pine crept northward, their roots delving into glacial dust. Willows and alders followed the rivers. Spruce and oak filled valleys once scoured clean. Over centuries, the transformation was astonishing. Where mammoths once trudged across open steppe groves of trees now reached skyward, their leaves whispering in winds, once dry with dust. This greening reshaped everything. The mammoth steppe, which had sustained the giants of the Ice Age, shrank and fragmented. Open plains turned to forests, grasslands receded, and the great herds lost the endless pastures they had relied upon. Without them, predators dwindled too. The silence left by mammoths and saber-tooths was replaced with birdsong, with rustling leaves, with rivers tumbling freely through valleys that had lain frozen for millennia. For humans, the new green world brought both loss and opportunity. The old ways of hunting mammoths and bison across vast plains became harder as forests closed in. But the forests themselves offered new resources. Deer, boar, and elk thrived under the canopy. Rivers swarmed with fish. Nuts, berries, and roots provided new staples. Human diets diversified, and with them, strategies for survival shifted. The rising seas sealed the transformation. As the glaciers melted, water surged back into the oceans, drowning the land bridges that had carried humans across continents. Beringia sank beneath the waves, Doggerland was swallowed by the North Sea, and the Sunda and Sahel shelves fractured into the islands of Southeast Asia and Oceania. Peoples who had once shared continuous landscapes now became islanders, separated by water. Cultures diverged, languages, branched identities formed in isolation. The Ice Age web of movement and migration gave way to more rooted lives. And in the fertile valleys left behind by retreating glaciers, something extraordinary began. The first stirrings of agriculture. The rich loess soils ground fine by ice and carried by winds proved ideal for planting. In places like the Fertile Crescent of the Middle East, humans began experimenting with cultivation. Wild grains became crops. Herded animals became livestock. Hunters turned into farmers, not because the old ways had failed, but because the new green world offered a different kind of abundance. This transition was not sudden. For thousands of years, people balanced between foraging and farming, still following herds when they could, but also planting and harvesting. But gradually, permanence took hold. Villages rose where bone huts had once stood. Fires burned in hearths of stone instead of temporary pits. Storage pits, filled with grain, replaced the uncertain promise of tomorrow's hunt. Humanity was stepping into a new age, one shaped less by ice and more by the seasons of planting and harvest. Yet the Ice Age never entirely disappeared. Its memory lingered in the land itself. The Great Lakes, vast and glimmering, stood as reminders of glaciers that had carved their basins. Fjords in Scandinavia and New Zealand testified to ice's patient chiseling. Fertile floodplains in China, India, and Europe carried the gift of glacial dust. Even the rivers we know today, the Mississippi, the Danube, the Yangtze trace paths, influenced by ice long gone. The green world was built upon the bones of the white. Culturally, too, the echoes remained. Myths of endless winters and floods haunted oral traditions. Animals like bison, elk, and reindeer became symbols of resilience, carrying forward the memory of herds once far larger. In northern regions, humans continued to adapt with skills honed in the Ice Age clothing sewn with bone needles, snow shelters, the harnessing of dogs for sleds. Though the glaciers had retreated, life in their shadow had permanently shaped us. Imagine standing in Europe or North America as the first great forests returned. The silence of the mammoth steppe is gone. Now leaves rustle overhead, and the air smells of pine and earth. Rivers run full, carrying meltwater from distant glaciers still lingering in the mountains. Birds sing in the canopy, a sound absent from the barren steppe. Deer move silently between trees, their antlers catching the light. For the first time in tens of thousands of years, the land feels abundant, not in scale, but in intimacy. Life no longer roams in endless herds across horizons. It rustles close near the camp, near the hearth. For humanity, this shift was profound. The Ice Age had taught us endurance to track, to hunt, to share knowledge by firelight. The Green Age taught us permanence to plant, to settle, to raise communities in one place. Together, they formed the foundation of civilization. The glaciers carved the stage, but it was the forests and rivers that set the scene for villages, cities, and nations yet to come. The earth, once locked in a frozen rhythm, was now warmer, wetter, greener. The giants were gone, but in their absence, new possibilities bloomed. The Ice Age had been an age of survival. The world that followed would be an age of creation. Part 18. Echoes of Ice. The glaciers have melted, the mammoth steppe has vanished, and the giants of fur and fang are mostly gone. Yet the Ice Age has never truly ended. Its echoes linger in stone and soil, in rivers and forests, in our bodies and our stories. To walk across the modern earth is to walk through the remnants of a frozen age that shaped everything we know. Look at the map. The Great Lakes gleam blue in North America, vast inland seas carved by the Laurentide ice sheet. Scandinavia's fjords slice deep into the land, their sheer walls reminders of glaciers that once flowed like rivers of stone. The fertile plains of Europe, China, and the American Midwest owe their richness to fine loess dust ground from mountains by ice and spread by relentless winds. Without those soils, agriculture might never have flourished as it did. The food we eat, the fields we plant, the landscapes we call home, all are gifts of the Ice Age's hand. Even the animals we know today carry its mark. Bison, reindeer, and musk oxen are survivors of the frozen plains, still echoing the herds that once thundered across continents. Arctic foxes and snowy owls still hunt in the silence of snow airs to a hidden world beneath drifts. Wolves, cousins of dire wolves, still follow humans in an uneasy partnership that began in the Ice Age and eventually gave us the first domesticated dogs. The line between predator and companion blurred by firelight, and humanity has carried that bond ever since. And we too are shaped by the ice. Our migrations out of Africa, across Asia, into Europe, over Beringia, into the Americas, were made possible by lowered seas and exposed lands. Our bodies adapted to cold, with shorter limbs in some regions, pale skin in others, the better to endure long winters with weak sunlight. Our cultures carry myths of endless winters and world-swallowing floods, whispers of real events retold until they became legend. In the very structure of our societies, cooperation, planning, storytelling, we see the imprint of an age that demanded endurance beyond the individual, survival rooted in community. The Ice Age also gave us memory. In caves painted with mammoths and lions, in carved figurines of ivory, in stories passed by firelight, we preserved not just survival knowledge, but imagination. We looked at the world of giants and predators, and we told ourselves that it meant something. That the mammoth was not just food, but a spirit. That the stars were not just lights, but hunters and prey frozen in the sky. In the bleakest winters, when survival seemed uncertain, humans dreamed. And those dreams have carried forward into every age since. It is easy, from our vantage point, to see the Ice Age as something distant finished. But it shaped the very ground beneath our feet. Rivers still follow the paths carved by meltwater. Valleys are still rebounding upward, rising from the weight of glaciers long gone. In Greenland and Antarctica, the last great ice sheets endure relics of a world that once stretched across continents. And in the climate itself, we still live in what geologists call the Quaternary Ice Age, a time defined by cycles of glaciers and interglacials. Ours is merely a warm interval, a pause in a frozen rhythm that may one day return. To imagine the Ice Age is to imagine contrasts. A world at once harsh and fertile, brutal and beautiful. Herds of mammoths trudging across windswept plains, while beneath the snow voles scurry unseen. Predators crouched in silence, while humans painted their likenesses in firelit caves. Giants fading into extinction, while villages begin to rise in fertile valleys. It was a time of loss and of creation of endings and beginnings, all woven together in the slow breath of glaciers. Think of it this way: when you stand on a beach and watch the tide retreat, the wet sand left behind still glimmers the shells and stones rearranged. The Ice Age was like that, a tide of ice that covered continents and then pulled back, leaving behind a reshaped world. We live on that beach now, on the land revealed by its retreat. Every forest, every farm, every city stands on ground once pressed flat by ice or fertilized by its dust. We are children of the thaw. And yet, perhaps the deepest echo of the Ice Age lies not in land or animals, but in us. In our stubbornness, our creativity, our drive to endure. When the cold pressed down, we made fire. When predators stalked us, we forged spears. When the world seemed indifferent, we painted its walls with meaning. That determination, honed against glaciers and storms, became the seed of civilization. Without the Ice Age, without its trials, we might never have learned to dream beyond survival. So the story of the Ice Age does not end with the melting of glaciers or the extinction of mammoths. It continues in every river, every fertile field, every myth of winter and flood. It continues in us, in the hands that still shape tools, in the voices that still tell stories by firelight, in the imagination that still looks at the stars and wonders. The Ice Age is not gone. It lingers. In echoes carved into stone and whispers carried by rivers, in the quiet persistence of life that endured its cold and carried its lessons forward. The ice has retreated, but its memory endures. It waits in bones buried in permafrost, in valleys carved by meltwater, in the breath of wind across the plains. And in us, in our resilience, our curiosity, our need to remember it lives on. The Ice Age never truly ends. It lingers quiet and vast in the world we walk and in the stories we tell.